Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and I'd like to welcome you to the Daily Compliance News. The Daily Compliance News is an offering of the Compliance Podcast Network. July 8th, 2019, the Fire the Lawyers edition. First up, for those who don't think corruption really is a global scourge, I urge you to take a look at an article in the New York Times entitled "Scandal Shows Power of China's Cash in Central Asia," where in Kyrgyzstan, officials needed to build a new power plant for the capital of the country, and they were pressured to do so by the Chinese, who dangled the prospect of a multi-billion-dollar loan in front of the Kyrgyzstan officials. The officials accepted bribes to make the recommendation that the Chinese be allowed to build a power plant, and it has been an unmitigated disaster for the country since then. So for those who wonder and claim that bribery is a victimless crime, well, it turns out that's not quite true. Next up, and today's headline story is that the Department of Justice is replacing all of its legal team in the census count fiasco that they have been engaging in federal court. Having been slammed by the Supreme Court and every court that's looked at their pretextual claim for changing the census, the Department of Justice is bringing in new lawyers to try to argue the case. Apparently, the lawyers who had argued the case felt they could no longer sign the briefs that the department wanted them to sign. So it's going to be interesting to see who the department brings in to handle this case, and if they actually come up with a legal reason for doing business, or rather going forward. Next up, in a very interesting ethical inquiry involving the U.S. Navy, William Morris, who had been confirmed as to take over the Navy's top job this summer, is stepping down over his association with a former naval officer who had been investigated for inappropriate behavior previously. Now, the admiral himself is not accused of inappropriate behavior, but only having a relationship with someone who is accused of having inappropriate behavior. So a couple of levels there, and you have to wonder if you can't even have a relationship now, what that may mean going forward. But rather than go through an ethics inquiry, the admiral has stepping down and is going to resign from the Navy. So it's a really interesting set of facts, and hopefully more will come out about this. But it shows, once again, the not only reputational damage, but if you lie down with a dog, you're probably going to get fleas. And finally, when is a meeting corruption? In the Wall Street Journal was a very interesting story about the massive $10 billion contract the Pentagon is going to award for cloud computing services. And Amazon appeared to be in the front runner seat for this, but it turns out that now there are a series of emails where high-ranking Pentagon officials, up to Secretary of Defense James Mattis, met with Amazon officials. While I don't find it unusual that a potential customer would meet with a service provider, apparently others did, including Senator Chuck Grassley, who claims that this is undue influence on the Department of Justice. It's hard to understand how or why this might be, but nevertheless, this is something the Department of Defense is going to now have to deal with, and you bet the other bidders on this project are going to be squawking and claiming Amazon used undue influence to get the contract and try to have it rescinded. Finally, a new podcast has appeared on the Compliance Podcast Network, The Integrity Factor, with AP Calpaldo and Marcia Weldon. Check it out on the Compliance Podcast Network. The Compliance Podcast Network is a proud member of C-Suite Radio.